we were seeing that sometimes the wrong people are getting promoted because managers are promoting what they see, which is the individual output, and less how that person acts or interacts rather with other people. So, you can't really have, if somebody's good at their job, it does not necessarily mean that they are going to be a good manager, right? So then you also have problems like that.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, President of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for all stakeholders. I'm joined today by Ranya Nehmeh. Ranya is Senior HR Strategist working on topics related to people strategy, HR policy, leadership development, and talent management in global multicultural environments. She and former Good Morning HR guest Peter Cappelli just released their new book, In Praise of the Office: The Limits to Hybrid and Remote Work. You can get a preview of their research in the July-August 2025 Harvard Business Review article, Hybrid Still Isn't Working. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Ranya.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I've told the story here many times. My listeners will indulge me that when COVID first happened and we all had to go remote, I was in the midst of doing it with my own company very rapidly, and then started getting calls from my clients about, look for insight and how to make this work and how to manage their employees. And pretty quickly, I came to the conclusion that employers who had good performance management systems in place, engaged employees, and just collaborative environments, we're going to do fine, at least through the COVID period of remote work. And anecdotally, that's kind of what I saw. My team went fully remote. We did so well. We're not going back, in office. It's worked so well for us. I've seen other employers succeed in that. I've seen a lot of other employers struggle with that, and certainly the larger organizations. We're seeing J.P. Morgan Chase, Amazon, companies like that beginning to drag employees back. Um, so, how do you grade just during that COVID crisis era where everybody went remote, and we look back on that period of 2020? How do you grade the effectiveness of how companies did remote work?
hmm That's a great question, Mike. So I think remote work was successful initially when we were in the pandemic, because it was really born out of kind of necessity. It was really crisis driven, right? So we were all in this together somehow. So organizations, they were really focused on survival during those early months, and I think they were measuring success through a very narrow lens, which was are people getting their work done? And in part, it was, yes, they were. Technology allowed us to stay connected. People had flexibility, which they loved. Employers saw that, operations continued without the office. So I think, in fact, many companies during that time also reported that they were even more productive, right?
We saw that, yeah.
Exactly. But I think that initial success, it's only years later, which showed that there were real, I think, issues as well, and they're only kind of arising now. So what we know now, after almost 5 years actually, of working in hybrid settings, is that many of the benefits of the office weren't really about productivity in a very strict sense. So they were really more about the development, I would say, infrastructure that kind of comes from being in a shared space. So things like learning through observation, informal mentoring, having access to quick feedback, absorbing the culture by just being there, right? So I think all of these things, remote work kind of stripped that away. And what I think now is that a lot of the companies are still operating in these old pre-pandemic ways. Like their management practices are still like that. So they haven't adjusted their management practices to suit current hybrid practices, hybrid settings. And because of that, I think we're seeing a lot of those issues, with collaboration, with innovation, with weakened culture, and so forth.
So then is that argument that pre-COVID they were already sitting next to each other or in the same building, they had relationships, they knew who to go to, and they were able to collaborate, they had mentors who they were working alongside, all of those things that come from being in proximity to each other. And then we went remote, and those connections, those relationships managed to maintain during remote, that initial remote period. But over time, is it that new people have come in organizations and they haven't had that indoctrination into the network and internal connections, and without practice of proximity to each other, maybe even people who've worked alongside each over a period of time have strayed apart and those connections are weaker. Is that kind of what the argument is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first big loss we see is really in terms of like informal interactions, because, those very quick hallway kind of chats that you have, the spontaneous ideas over coffee, the small signals of trust and connection that you simply don't have in a Zoom call. So, if you already had friends or work colleagues before, let's say before you went remote, then you knew also exactly who to ask for help, when you had a question, when you were in
Mhm.
a hybrid setting. But newcomers don't have that luxury. Newcomers they are the ones I think who suffer the most in these hybrid settings, because they need to learn through guidance, through seeing, through observing. And in a remote setting, that is quite difficult. In the book, actually, we do mention one focus groups that were conducted, that Peter Cappelli conducted with a colleague of his, where I interviewed over 700 people, and none of them said that they made a work friend during that time.
Mhm.
And newcomers really struggled when they pinged somebody for help to get a response back, because they didn't have this social network already in place. So people generally were like, sure, sure, we'll schedule a call, at some point. But it took a really long time to get that. So the average person, newcomer, would take approximately maybe 3 months to integrate. And that's really long.
Mhm.
That's 3 months where you're not working super efficiently either.
Yeah, and even if you're in that training and onboarding period without those connections, that just drags on those things and probably makes that employee less sticky to the organization during that crucial period when
Exactly.
they're deciding, is this really where I want to work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. So new hires obviously, struggle. What about the thing that I hear all the time? And I was initially skeptical of, but I've come around on it, I think. But collaboration is injured. We're not getting uh, new ideas. We're not getting the innovation that we had. The problem solving isn't as robust when we're not in the same place, at least how we're doing it right now. So is that a valid concern in your data? Does it show that?
Yeah, and actually, there's a couple of sources also that we cite. One of them was a study actually that showed that patent generation, which is a proxy for innovation, it dropped by 20% also in remote first environments. Because again, a lot of the times when we are together, we start to have chats. This could lead to brainstorming, before meetings, after meetings you're collaborating.
Hmm.
It's a different kind of environment, and with that environment sparks more innovation, brainstorming, new ideas. Um, there was another study that we also cited by Microsoft that showed that remote teams communicate more with their own silos and less across departments. So really limiting cross-functional breakthroughs as well. So
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to, like you said, in my corporate experiences, I had friends in completely different management chains and different parts of the organization who I might have one meeting with and just, click with and get to know, or, met in a break room or something. And I could but that would be somebody when I had a question about accounting. I could go to and say, "Hey, tell me how this works. Can you explain this to me?" And they'd do the same for me in HR stuff. And when you're remote, if you even have that meeting with somebody in another silo, uh, they're on, they're off, and that's it. And it's probably a little bit more awkward just to ping somebody and say, "Can we jump on a Zoom and have a real quick conversation?" versus just knocking on their office door and say, "Hey, can you give me 5 minutes to pick your brain?"
And it's very funny, Mike, that you just mentioned about accounting because we mentioned that in the book as
Oh,
well. Like when we had a question with accounting, we would go to them and we would ask for that. It's true. And you resolve everything in a matter of minutes sometimes. Whereas if you're doing this online, and especially if you still are new and you don't know exactly who to contact, it can take you half a day just to understand who to contact them, to wait, to schedule a Zoom. All of these things are time consuming. And another, I think, very interesting, kind of a phenomena that we found was when we speak about collaboration is also employee attitudes, because employees are very focused on meeting their individual key performance indicators, right? And accomplishing the tasks that they have, and less interested in helping colleagues so they would rather finish their own tasks first before they were helping others, right? So it also creates this kind of culture of being an individual contributor, less than being part of a team, right? Less
mhm.
than this cohesion and collaboration. And that also, of course, affects the culture.
Because you're measuring what you can see, and so you can see this one person's checkbox that they got this job done, or they produce this much output, but seeing how they interact with other people, getting an idea of the kind of leader they would be.
Exactly.
Is this a high potential employee who we would move into a leadership program versus helping them get into another certification, a more specialty thing where they don't need to be leading people because some people just aren't relying for that.
And this is exactly what you just mentioned right now, is also one of the issues, which was about promotions. About we were seeing that sometimes the wrong people are getting promoted because managers are promoting what they see, which is the individual output, and less how that person acts or interacts rather with other people. So, you can't really have, if somebody's good at their job, it does not necessarily mean that they are going to be a good manager, right? So then you also have problems like that.
What about overall employee engagement? Is there data connecting fully remote versus hybrid to being fully in office as to the level of employee engagement, or is that a different matter?
I mean, I think, that the topic of employee engagement is massive and we could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, we just did an episode a few weeks ago on that topic, but I'm just, yeah, do
Yeah.
you see much in how remote work is affecting that?
I mean, there is two sides, I think, to this story for sure. We know that employees, I think their preferred way of working is flexible, of course, and is hybrid. Now, of course, if you ask how many days do you want to go into the office, or, then again, you can already start with dissatisfaction at that early stage because, some employees want to only go twice, others are okay with going 3 times. So this already you can already see this could impact engagement. But there is a study that I actually saw from Gallup that showed, I think this was 2024, that 12% of employees are not happy with their hybrid setups. So it shows also that employees acknowledge that there are some flaws with hybrid, and this can also lead to disengagement. So there's really two sides to the story.
And like I mentioned, we're seeing Microsoft, Amazon, a lot of big employers. I mean, the JP Morgan thing was a big deal when Jamie Dimon came out last year and just said, we ain't doing this anymore.
Hmm. Hmm.
And, and so do you think that's the way most organizations need to do is pull employees back into the office on a full-time basis?
I think there are better ways of doing this, and we are not. We are actually, although the book is called In Praise of the Office, we're not actually saying everyone come back to the office. What we are saying is, what is the future office going to look like, and how do we ensure that that your management practices are suited for it. So in that sense, I think that first of all, we need to drop the word mandate
Mm.
because I think it really triggers a lot of people, because it makes you also feel like it's a control and command situation. And that is one of the issues also of employee engagement, because employees feel like management want us back into the office because they don't trust us. I think we need to reframe that whole part and say management wants you to come back to the office because it's good for you, because of your career growth, because of collaboration, because it's going to spark innovation. So I think we need to reframe the narrative. And then it's a basic organizational change issue. So you really need to, I don't think you should, from one day to the next, tell everyone, come back. I think you need to explain it. Why do you have to come back? Is it because of collaboration, of culture? I think people want to be involved, and I think that change management plays a very big part in this.
Is hybrid any better than remote versus being in the office, or are there ways to structure a hybrid scenario that would work better than other ways people have done hybrid?
I mean, I think with hybrid, there are some basics that can be done, that would already improve things. One that I can think about is anchor days. And don't leave that for every manager to decide. I think you need to, because what happens then is that every manager decides differently. Nobody wants to be the bad guy, so they let employees then do what they want, and that's when you have this inconsistency and this unfair treatment. So I think you need to decide on anchor days. You also need to, I mean, there's simple things like meeting effectiveness. Now, all of us who have worked hybrid know there's an excessive amount of meetings, right? And in hybrid settings, they seem to have become more. There's also more people involved because you do not have, a limit on the room, so you
Mm-hmm.
can invite a lot of people. You have half of them with their cameras off, which we assume they're multitasking, and then there's a post-meeting meeting, because nobody was really paying attention, so we have to discuss everything afterwards. Now, this is extremely ineffective, and so many people that we have spoken to have complained about this excessive number of meetings. So what organizations can do very easily is track that, limit that. Companies like GitLab, like Atlassian, the ones who are really remote, fully remote, they have, I think, major documents, very detailed about things like that. Who attends the meetings? Why is the meeting necessary? What's the agenda? And I think you have to be much more structured, so people don't feel like they're wasting their time. So this is something very basics. So enforce these kind of rules. Then, of course, I think there are the more serious things like performance management, as you mentioned. How do you do it and do it well? The proximity bias is real. So out of sight, out of mind. If you're not in the office, your manager starts to rely on those who are. When it comes to promotion time, maybe you will not be moving ahead because you're not visible. So it becomes less about performance and more about visibility. So in a hybrid setting, to do it right, you have to rectify that. Yeah, you have to really track, how managers are doing this performance appraisals, what metrics they're using, how to make sure that that the ones who are working remotely are not left behind. So these are a couple of, I think, simple things which we also mention in the article, the Harvard Business Review article, of what can be done.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. Imperative is the background investigations partner for employers who want to make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. I could share dozens of technical details about how we ensure that our research is more thorough, our reporting is more robust, and our compliance stricter than other firms. But the real magic is my amazing team and the white glove treatment they give our clients. If you deserve that kind of treatment, and want to make well informed hiring decisions that help avoid loss, liability, and litigation, reach out to us at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 220 and enter the keyword Office. That's OFFICE. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. Now back to my conversation with Ranya Nehmeh. What do you think if we're going to go hybrid, what's the mix? Is it 3 days in, 2 days out, or is it just really dependent on the organization and the kind of work they do, or what do you think drives that?
Yeah, I think this is very much dependent actually on the organization. I really don't believe there is a one size fits all. You need to see what works for your people, what works for your culture. If you're a very young team, perhaps you need more guidance. Newcomers need more guidance. So maybe you do need like 3 days a week in the office. If it's more individual contributor roles, maybe you don't. Maybe you need less. So this is something that you would really need to assess. So actually, yeah, you would need to assess the work itself, the workforce, the organization, the culture of the organization, and probably also your competition. Because if you're working in an industry where everybody is like working 4 days a week, let's say remote, let's say, then you also have to take that into consideration, or the other way
From
around.
a talent attraction point of view, right? Is that so
Exactly.
you can
A
use.
talent attraction and maybe talent attrition.
Mhm. Yeah. And if we're when we're talking about, let's say I want to bring in, you talked about anchor days, and let's say I want to bring people in, is that, you said don't let each manager decide about that. So then what does an anchor day look like? Is it like everybody in the entire organization is in the office on the same days, or how does that work?
I think yes, to a certain extent, yes. However, it can also, maybe you don't let each local manager, but for example, certain departments can decide, it depends on the size of the organization, of course, but certain departments can decide, okay, we do need everybody in on this day because we want to do, some team activities or something. So it should also be, I think, team-based, but just not left to every single manager. But maybe on a bigger departmental level, it can be.
Okay. And a lot of companies gave up their footprint, right? There's a lot of disconnected office space and a lot of office in high-rise office buildings now, because companies had 3 floors, now have 2.5, or half of one, and so they're challenged by the idea of bringing people back to office. So how do you ameliorate that? I mean, because a lot of companies don't want to take that overhead back on, especially at a time where all the other prices are rising, and they don't want to increase their cost. How do you balance that? You need this collaboration, you need these interactions between employees, but are we really willing to make this much of an investment in office space that we've already released?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also examples of a lot of companies that are doing the opposite, that they are really now taking a lot of spaces that they have and kind of just redesigning them to make them into more collaborative hubs. So I think that again, it's true. A lot of companies, maybe they don't have the space to have everybody come in. But if they don't want to make the investment to do that, then redesign the spaces, perhaps, make certain spaces good for collaboration. I've seen examples of a lot of like areas where you typically like coffee break areas now, they're completely redesigned. For this kind of collaboration. So I think there are things that can be done to create an environment that is more kind of encouraging for employees. The alternative is, of course, which a lot of companies are doing, is hot desking,
Mm-hmm.
which I think a lot of employees do not like. But this is a reality. Hot desking, open plan offices.
But what I think I hear you saying describing is more of an office space that's more like a WeWork kind of environment with more conference rooms, more work areas that are shared and can be used by a group for something, for a specific purpose, and then they can disperse back out if they need to, and then somebody else can use that space. But I'm taking it you're not a big fan of hot desking. That I'm going to come sit here and there's going to be a sticky spot on the desk from the guy who was here yesterday and he didn't clean up his mess and that kind of thing. I don't feel like I've got a connection to this physical space.
I mean, this is what I also hear from a lot of people that they really don't like it, and then they say, "But I work better at home because when you have the hot desking, usually it's typically open plan, right? Which means it's loud. You can't have confidential calls. You don't have your stuff around you. So there's a lot of, I think, concern with employees and that. Although I personally don't mind it because for me, it's the work. I do the work here, there. I have no problem with it. But I do understand that it can, of course, cause some concern. But I think the question is really, again, it's bigger than that because the question is, why are you coming into the office? So has the organization explained? Is it because we need to collaborate? Because if we do, then the hot desking is not really perhaps the way to do it because everybody's sitting doing their own thing.
Mhm.
Is it are you coming in for team activities, for get-togethers, for collaboration, for brainstorming? So I would think, what is the purpose? Because if it's to do your individual work, yeah, it's true, you can do it at home.
A lot of people, I spend way too much time on Reddit looking at all the employment related stuff on Reddit, but I hear all the time I can't get work done in the office because people constantly stop by and talk to me and blah blah blah. And as the extrovert in the room, that's what drives me crazy about working from home is that lack of interaction, those surprise moments where I learned something I wouldn't have learned otherwise. But if you're going to drag, I think what I hear you saying is if you're going to drag people back to the office, make sure they understand why and that there's a purpose behind it that is more than because I say so. And how important is communicating the actual data? I mean, I'm sure when when Jamie Dimon came out last year and said that, and he didn't give a lot of details, it was just mostly anecdotal. And I was having a conversation, I may have said it on this podcast, the I have no doubt that Jamie Dimon has hard data to drive this decision because he knows he's going to lose key performers. He's going to lose key employees who just, they've moved to Wyoming. They're not moving back to New York City or wherever. They're not going to do that. And so it's a, I have no doubt that that's a data driven decision for JP Morgan or most of these large companies. But so how much of the data, or do you think the employees really care about the data and they just, how much of it is going to be important to them?
Well, the thing is, Mike, I sometimes wonder, we've had 5 years to make hybrid work. And if it had worked really well, I don't think that these big companies would be bringing their employees back in to the office if everything was working really well. So I think there are cracks in this, and I think data-driven decisions are for sure what drove the decisions. Now, I don't know. I think it would have been good to share this data with employees. Whether they did or not, I actually don't think so.
Yeah,
I didn't hear
it
that.
certainly it sounded like it from all the pushback that they got online and in the media.
Yeah, because they did get a lot of pushback, right?
Mhm.
I'm not sure if they shared that, but I do think, and this is part of the organizational kind of change. You need an organizational change plan, and to really communicate these things. But then again, I also, I think in these big companies, they probably also thought that, okay, if employees want to leave because of that, they have a different view to it. They probably thought, okay, because they were convinced about their decision, so they must have had the data to back it up.
Yeah, I think that's got to be true. And if we're in this world where it's just, if our environment is just, we don't have the footprint, or we've already dispersed. I mean, my employees, we went remote, and I told my employees they could live anywhere in Texas. I wasn't going to become a multi-state employer. And it's worked, but they have dispersed. And, there are precious few employees located relative to where our office used to be. And now I've got one in Kentucky, and I've got 8 in Mexico, because the technology has made it easier for me to hire people. And so that's all been great. But, it would be a disaster to try to bring them all back. So, any insights about performance management, how that needs to be different in a remote environment versus in-house?
Yes, but Mike, I would have a quick question on what you
Sure,
just
sure.
said. When you told your employees that you can do that, right?
You're
That
right.
you can go. And now, what surprises me is that when we first went remote, a lot of people, they actually, they changed state, they changed
Right.
country. Now, but the employer never said this is a permanent arrangement,
Right.
right? I think it's just because it dragged on one year after the other. Employees assumed that it became a given, right,
All
in
right.
order to do that. So for me, it's always a surprise when people say, but they moved completely away from, but who said that?
Yeah. Yeah, and
You
I
know?
told them very quickly. I told them right up front that we weren't going to do
Yeah.
this, and lost a couple employees right then, because their spouses were able to get other roles in other places, or they've always wanted to live in California for God knows why, and those kind of things. So, um, but we were really clear. And then when the great resignation happened, and it was getting harder and harder to even find employees who were at the caliber I was looking for, we were able to find them through a relationship through Mexico. And so we found the ways to do it. And for us it wouldn't work. But and our performance management, I mean, because we're really performance driven here, and I'm, all of my senior team is all here in Fort Worth. And so we meet one on one regularly in person, because, that's how I problem solve. I need a sounding board. I need that. And I don't do it as well online. Um, but my other folks, there are people who've, never physically met their boss, their supervisor, but they talk almost daily, and there's constant feedback. And I'm constantly dragging my supervisors out of daily work. Your job is to make sure the employees, that you're helping, incentivizing, leading the team, so they can helping them get their job done, and rather than you know, diving in and doing the work. But I think a lot of organizations have these managers who are half supervisor, half worker bee. And so, how do you, so going back to that, how do you design jobs differently, maybe design roles differently, and manage performance management differently?
Well, I think for performance management, it's really, the KPIs that you use, they have to include things like responding in a timely manner to requests for help, for example. If that's important to you, this aspect of helping others, especially newcomers, I think you need to put that down on paper to really incentivize people to do that. Mentoring, you can also include that then as a KPI, assisting new hires, and that all of these factors will be used to determine, let's say, bonuses, merit raises, promotions. So I think you have to put them down on paper and make it clear what they are.
Interesting. And mentoring is another area that I think is probably really impacted negatively by people being really remote in most environments, because so much of mentoring is just giving some, in my experience with my mentors and people I've tried to mentor, so much of it is just being available to be a sounding board, to give insight and experience advice. And I think that would be harder to jump on a Zoom call to do that until things are at a crisis point where you're feeling a lot of pain, and it may be too late for that mentoring to really help.
Yeah. The thing is, honestly, when we talk about career growth isn't just about like doing good work. It's about being noticed and having advocates, as we know, right?
Hmm.
And those relationships are harder, much harder to form when you're remote. In the book, we also mention real life interviews with two people who attended the same leadership training. One did it remote, one did it in person, and it was the difference was massive. The people they met during this training, the mentors that they found, the lunches they went to, this bonding that they created, which led to more opportunities down the line. So this is just something that happens organically and naturally, and we don't see that on. You can't replicate that on Zoom.
Right.
A quick coffee with a leader. You meet somebody in the hallway. Oh, can I just pick your brain for 1 minute? Quick coffee, and you never know, that can translate into an opportunity down the line. These moments are what we have missed, and what we miss in hybrid settings.
So, what are any other takeaways? We're up on time, but any other takeaways that you and Peter came up with in looking at the research and doing your own research?
Well, I mean, I think that the main takeaway is really, how do we change these management practices to suit this hybrid setting? And again, it's not about bringing people back to the office per se, but it's really about kind of seeing where the future office, or what the future office will look like, and what we can do to get there. So that's
Interesting.
that's really.
Well, that's all the time we have, but I really do appreciate you joining me, Ranya.
Thanks so much. This was great. Thank you.
And the book is Praise of the Office: The Limits to Hybrid and Remote Work. I'll leave links to that and some of the HBR article and some of the studies we talked about in the show notes if you want to dig deeper, as well as contact information for both Ranya and Peter. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening. And then share this episode on your favorite social media platform. It really does help other people find us. And we'd love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. Good Morning HR is produced by Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral on Imperative's marketing team. The Good Morning HR theme music was created by Steve Pegler at HR Strategies of Texas. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.